If you ever find yourself in Camelot, standing in the middle of the training field while a golden-haired royal shouts about the aerodynamics of a lance, do me a favor. Run. Run as fast as you can in the opposite direction. Because if you don't, you might end up like me. Merlin, the idiot manservant, the secret sorcerer, and the only person in this entire kingdom who seems to realize that Arthur Pendragon is simultaneously the greatest hope for our world and the biggest prat to ever walk the earth. I remember this particular week clearly. It started with a tournament, which in Camelot is just another way for Arthur to get his ego stroked, while I get stuck polishing enough plate armor to blind a dragon. But this time, Arthur had a grand idea. That's usually where my headaches begin. Arthur was winning. Of course, he was winning. He's the best knight in the 5 kingdoms, but he was miserable. He sat in his chambers, surrounded by the finest silks and the heaviest gold, looking like someone had just told him Christmas was cancelled. He was worried, actually worried, that the only reason he won was because he was the prince, that his opponents were pulling their punches out of fear of Uther's wrath. Naturally, his solution wasn't to talk to a therapist or take up gardening. No, his solution was to enter the tournament as a commoner, anonymously. And who did he expect to facilitate this insanity? Me. Merlin, he said, with that look in his eye that means I'm about to do something illegal. I need a champion. A fake one. I ended up in a tavern, scouring the dregs of the outlying villages for someone who looked enough like a knight from a distance, but was stupid enough to do whatever I said for a few silver coins. I found him. William. A man whose primary skills seemed to be drinking ale and looking confused. I had to dress this person in Arthur's spare armor and convince the tournament officials that he was Sir William of Dera. The plan was simple, or so Arthur claimed in his typical arrogant fashion. Arthur would act as William's servant, wearing a commoner's tunic and a helmet that hid his face, while the real William sat in the stands looking knightly. This meant Arthur would live like a commoner. And since I couldn't exactly hide the Crown Prince in my tiny room in Gaius's chambers without the physician having a heart attack, we needed a place for him to stay. Enter Guinevere. Gwen is, quite frankly, the best of us. She's kind, and she's brave, and she has a patience level that should be studied by scholars. When I asked her if a friend could stay at her house for the duration of the tournament, she agreed without hesitation. She didn't know the friend was the man she usually served in the palace. The moment Arthur stepped into Gwen's cottage, the comedy of errors began. I've seen Arthur face down beasts from the old religion without blinking, but the sight of a broom and a pile of laundry seemed to strike genuine terror into his heart. "Where is the bed?" he asked, looking around the small, cozy room as if he were looking for a missing limb. "You're standing on it," Gwen replied, pointing to the simple pallet on the floor. It was glorious. For the first time in his pampered life, Arthur had to fetch his own water, cook his own food, or try to, and the horror of all horrors, clean up after himself. But Gwen, she didn't treat him like a prince. She treated him like a lazy, entitled servant who wasn't pulling his weight. She barked orders at him. She told him he was useless at chores. And Arthur, bless his stubborn soul, just took it. He was frustrated, yes, but he was also intrigued. He's spent his whole life surrounded by people who say, "Yes, sire," before he's even finished speaking. Gwen gave him a, "No, you're doing it wrong." And it was like he'd discovered a new language. While Arthur was learning the complexities of stew-making, a darker shadow was falling over Camelot. King Elind, a man with a smile like a snake and a heart like a pit of vipers, wanted Arthur dead. He didn't want a fair fight. He wanted an assassination that wouldn't lead back to him. He hired Myror. Myror wasn't just a mercenary. He was a professional. He was the kind of man who didn't miss. I saw him lurking in the shadows of the lower town, and my magic senses, the ones that usually tell me when I'm about to be eaten by a griffin, went into overdrive. I couldn't tell Uther. If I told the king there was an assassin, he'd shut down the tournament and find Arthur in a heartbeat, ruining the prince's quest for truth. I couldn't tell Arthur because he'd just charge out there with a sword and get himself killed by a crossbow bolt from the dark. So, as usual, it was up to me, the invisible protector. The tournament began. The atmosphere in Camelot was electric. The real Sir William was a disaster.
Review as men. For only the most skillful, the most fearless among you will emerge as a worthy champion.
I had to keep him hidden in the tent, stuffed with enough food and wine to keep him quiet, while Arthur suited up. When Arthur rode out onto the field, his face hidden by a plain, battered visor, the crowd cheered for the unknown knight. He looked different without the Pendragon crest. He looked leaner, faster, more dangerous. He was magnificent. Without the weight of the Pendragon name, he fought with a raw, unbridled energy. He unhorsed his first opponent in seconds. Then the second. then the third. He wasn't just winning, he was proving to himself that he earned his place in the world. But the world didn't stay quiet for long. Uther was convinced King Odin had sent an assassin to avenge his son, and while the king was busy locking down the citadel to protect an absent prince, I was stuck in the middle of a literal death trap. Back at the cottage, the commoner life was hitting Arthur hard. We sat at dinner, and he actually had the nerve to ask if he had any annoying habits. Gwen, bless her, didn't hold back. She told him he snored like a pig. Watching Arthur's royal ego deflate at the dinner table was almost better than the tournament itself. But then, she noticed the plates. Royal seal. Stolen from the palace kitchens. Arthur can kill a chicken from 1,000 paces, but ask him to cook one? He'd rather commit petty theft. Gwen gave him a lecture on humility that I think actually pierced his armor. She told him a good king should respect his people, no matter who they are. I had to ruin the moment, of course. I burst in to tell him the truth. There was an assassin in Camelot, and he was the target. Arthur didn't run. He didn't hide. He just asked if he could stay with Gwen a little longer, even offering to sleep on the floor, before immediately telling me to go back to the palace and carry his royal mattress to the cottage on my own. Because apparently, even in hiding, a prince's back is far too precious for a wooden floor. The morning of the final match felt different. Gwen gave him a favor to wear for luck. And then, they kissed. A real quiet moment that felt like the beginning of something much bigger than a tournament. But the luck didn't last. Myror, the assassin, had taken the place of Sir Alanor, and he wasn't playing by the rules. He disguised a deadly, sharpened point on his lance. During the first pass, Myror's lance pierced Arthur's armor. I watched from the sidelines as Arthur stumbled into the tent, blood soaking through his tunic. Gwen was frantic, begging him to withdraw, telling him he had nothing to prove. But Arthur? He looked her in the eye and said he had everything to prove. To himself. He climbed back onto that horse, barely able to hold his shield. I knew he wouldn't survive another hit. As they charged, I saw Myror leveling that lethal lance. I didn't think. I just acted. I whispered the words, "Unbindete teage." With a flick of magic, the girth on Myror's horse snapped. The assassin went flying, hitting the dirt with a finality that ended the threat for good. Arthur had won, but as always, it was Sir William who had to go out and collect the trophy. Arthur just sat in the shadows of the tent, showing a kind of humility I never thought I'd see. By the time we got back to the palace, Arthur was back to his old self, telling Uther he'd spent the week hunting a barefaced lion and making peace with the idea of Odin's grief. He even found a second to pull Gwen aside and tell her that while his father would never understand what happened between them, maybe things would be different when he was king. And me? My reward for saving the future of Albion and carrying a mattress across town was a lecture from Gaius about the perils of lying and a stint cleaning the leech tanks.
And Merlin, there's something on your face.
What?
As I sat there with 3 leeches currently attached to my face, watching Gaius laugh at my misery, I realized that being the invisible protector mostly just involves a lot of slime. But hey, at least Arthur knows how a mop works now, sort of.